All right, it looks like we're live. Hello, everyone, again. My name is Michaela Lee. I am here representing Lead, Ohio. I am actually on the road right now, which is why we don't have a sign up, but I'm really excited to be here to do another interview with an incredible woman, Laura Rodriguez-Carbone, and I'm really excited to hear more about her story and to share with our platform, the things that she's been up to. So once again, just wanted to let everyone know that this project that we're doing is a candidate storytelling project, a collaboration between Lead Ohio and Ohio Women's Alliance Action Fund. And we're working to uplift the voices of women of color across the state working to better their communities through electoral pathways. Both of our organizations are nonpartisan 501c4 nonprofits. So this project is just an effort to uplift candidates, regardless of political affiliation. We are not endorsing, we're not promoting the campaigns. We just wanted to tell the stories of women across the state who have really incredible things to share. And this process was an interview, an application process, and those are all available to any woman running in Ohio who is interested in being interviewed in this way. So just wanted to get that out of the way before we launch into our conversation. So Laura, I have had the pleasure of meeting you this year and working with you. I'm so excited that you were able to join us today. Just to start off with, do you want to share with everyone a little bit about you and your background and what you're up to?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you so much, Michaela. It's been wonderful to work with you and with the Lead Ohio staff. And I want to thank you so much for having me this evening. A little bit about me. I am a community leader. I have, for the past 21 years, been an advocate, a volunteer on over 21 boards, think tanks, and commissions. And I grew up in the near west side of Cleveland, the daughter of farmers. Specifically, my father was a migrant farm worker who came from Puerto Rico as part of the U.S. Farm Labor Program and worked in Pennsylvania's rural farmlands picking tomatoes, and eventually came here to Cleveland. Both my parents worked in factories. My father was a union awning maker. My mother made airplane parts for Boeing. So definitely, today's Labor Day, and I'm definitely feeling my parents right now, and very proud of their ability to work as hard as they can for us as a family, and the dignity of the work that they were able to put in to contribute to our country. So currently, I am a candidate for Lakewood City Council at large. I'm co-chair of the Anti-Racism Task Force in Lakewood, and current chair of a Democratic, Hispanic, and Latino caucus in Ohio. So I'm really happy to be here, and looking forward to sharing more about my background and kind of what's going on, with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was actually, as soon as you said that, I was like, oh my gosh, today's Labor Day. We should talk a little bit about that. So obviously, that background that your parents had helped you kind of push you in that direction. Can you talk a little bit more about what led you to this path of service, and whether it was influenced by your parents or what kind of in your life brought you to this point?
Sure. So especially in Latino communities, when I was growing up, we were told that education was the way of the future. We were told that the economy was changing, and for my parents, it did. They struggled with layoffs from factories, and in and out of specific periods of working and maybe doing day labor. So I grew up as a working class person. Had a really good aptitude for school, and was really bit by the public service bug in college through the federal work study program. And really, in addition to that, what led me to public service was throughout my life, there were really good programs out there to help, families like mine, things like food stamps or Medicaid, for health insurance, federal student loans, financial aid helped me to be able to start my college degree and also still be a working person. So when I started with federal work study, I worked with the U.S. Department of Education and, just felt very strongly about the programs that lifted my family up and kind of how I was able through those programs to pass that along to other generations. And, I thought that, it was probably maybe a calling for me to want to help other people, to want to lift other people up in that way, especially those maybe whose voices are not necessarily always at the forefront of any policy considerations or decision making. I think as a daughter of a migrant farmer, you kind of get the sense that you're kind of left out, that you don't really matter as much, and that whatever you say doesn't really move kind of the needle for anyone. And so kind of being able to navigate those systems and especially with other migrant farm worker families, I saw a need there for someone to be an advocate, to make sure that everybody had access to information, and that knowledge piece. I think education is so empowering, and was certainly empowering for me to be able to give back to my community.
Yeah, absolutely. And this reminds me of a previous conversation that we had talking specifically about Lakewood and the community that you live in, and all of the things that are going on that you're obviously really excited to make an impact on. But one thing that really stuck out to me, and I want to give you the opportunity to share, but was talking about the housing situation in Lakewood and what that meant for you and your family. And so, yeah, do you mind telling us a little bit about, what living in Lakewood represents now and what you want to do as a person, elected into office there?
Sure, I can definitely share that with you. So, as you know, redlining was utilized all over the U.S., and Lakewood and in Greater Cleveland were no different from that, narrative. And looking at the maps from a generation ago, I now live in a home in what was once considered to be a gold standard neighborhood, where a generation ago, families like mine would never have had the opportunity to purchase that home because of redlining. As redlining is the racist policy that, prevented people like my family from buying homes with good schools and safe neighborhoods. And so I think, as a community, not being that far removed from that, I think it's good to pause and kind of take a look at where we've been and kind of where we still need to go. Lakewood has had wonderful success with home values, and it's a great problem to have. But we do have a lot of working families, seniors, and folks with fixed incomes where, they're starting to be priced out. And we want to make sure that our community is as inclusive of folks that we have many seniors who have owned their home for 30, 40 years that have to leave because they can't afford to transition to apartment rentals in Lakewood. So, I definitely think there's much we can do through the American Rescue Fund dollars to help some of those folks be able to stay either in their homes or stay in their apartments, and kind of look for ways to make housing affordable and inclusive, and also make sure we're closing loopholes like redlining in Lakewood. So I'm looking forward to looking more at that and working within the community to make sure that everyone's represented in those conversations.
Yeah, that's amazing. Another thing that I am really excited that you've been able to do. So you're working directly with the Latino and Hispanic community across the state through your role as the chair of the caucus. Can you talk a little bit more about the importance of having Latino representation in office, and specifically in the community that you live in?
Well, absolutely. I think that representation in office in every community is extremely important. I think looking at the Latino population across Ohio, which has grown as of the last census, and also across the country, where we are increasing in population size, and we continue to move in the direction that has been projected that we will one day make up the majority of the U.S. population. But I think representation in general matters, because representation means that you have diversity not only in maybe your ethnic or racial makeup or background, but also in experiences and viewpoints. And I know that at least in Lakewood, viewpoints from a person like me, they don't really exist on our city council. And, in its 130 plus year history, we've never had a person of color sit on our council. Even though, they share our community. We have a very large refugee community and New American community. And, we have Latinos, Hispanics, African Americans, Indigenous population, our AAPI brothers and sisters as well. So I think it's important that our representation actually represent the future that we're trying to build. And looking at our future in Lakewood, I see one that is rooted in making sure that we are promoting our diversity and making sure that, we continue to be a welcoming city that people want to move to, that people want to invest in, buy homes in, and raise families in. And that's what I'm committed to. And I think that, we do a lot of things well, but we have to make sure that we are moving to looking at where there may be gaps or areas for improvement. And in order to do that, I think we do need some more diverse voices, and that our representation should also reflect that.
Yeah, that's amazing. So switching gears just a little bit, talking about the pandemic and COVID and all of the things that we've been experiencing in the past year. So wanted to ask specifically with your background and working on task forces to ensure that people are able to get the information that they need. Can you talk about kind of just your background in, providing these services and how that helps you in running for office now?
Sure. So I currently am the Midwest Outreach and Communications Lead, supporting the federal COVID responses, Combat COVID initiative. Prior to this, I've almost exclusively had outreach roles. I've worked, I've worked extensively with under-resourced communities, with communities of color, and a lot of my expertise lies in the ability to reach different types of communities to make sure that folks are represented in all sorts of policy and public health conversations, that they have access to the resources they need, and that their wishes can kind of rest with me as an advocate. To be able to make some of the changes that need to happen based on, anything situational that has happened. And I've seen so much over the last 21 years, especially with regard to public health and access to care. I worked the last couple of years prior to this one with dialysis patients across the U.S. And I spent a lot of the pandemic working with folks on who are in end-stage renal disease and on Medicare. And so helping folks to navigate that system, being a support for them, but also making sure that we're enforcing our own civil rights laws, and with regard to everybody being able to access the same continuity and value of care is very important. As you can imagine, during COVID, working with a high-risk population, we didn't really know much about, no one knew much about the virus, and everybody was just trying to do whatever they could to try to kind of adapt. But it was definitely, I would say that's one of the populations that definitely had a very difficult go of it. And, I always admire those folks' resilience and just working with us to be able to make sure that they can still access life-saving care. But, I think those experiences, all the experiences I've had, I'm often asked for opinions. I've gotten appointments to boards specifically for my expertise in working with diverse communities and being able to be resourceful with, getting resources to the communities that need them. And I think that looking at Lakewood and kind of looking at maybe what's missing from our city council is it's basic community outreach. It's being able to connect on a deeper level with folks. It's establishing that trust with them, and it's accessibility and active representation. And I think my skill set in this area is definitely my strength. And I think that, I think together with the community, we're going to be able to do some great things to make sure that people are healthier in Lakewood, that Lakewood's affordable, and that we are an inclusive city to call home for years and years to come.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. So I have a question as someone who has been on the campaign trail from a staffer perspective, of course, but I feel like there is not ever a time where I didn't have like somewhat of a soundtrack or a go-to song when I was like knocking doors or, whatever, getting me pumped up to do whatever crazy thing I had to do that day. So do you have any go-to songs or artists that you're listening to right now to just keep you motivated during this time?
Yes, we actually have a campaign playlist on our Spotify, which is on my website. But I think a song that probably embodies me that I actually listen to is All About Soul by Billy Joel. It reminds me that the reason why I'm running for office is very personal, and that it comes from my heart. It comes from my experience in seeing how connections transform the community. And really it's, at the heart of any policy is people, and at the heart of any person is a soul. So that's what it's all about for me. And it's such an uplifting song. Songs like that, Living in America by James Brown is also a great, one to put on as you're, walking around. What About Us by Pink is also a great song as well.
Great song.
So those are all very meaningful tracks to me, and ones that have been on continuous loops in my, Apple library.
Amazing. All right. So we just have one final question before we kind of wrap everything up. So you are running in an off year. We have kind of seen a lot of really wild things campaign-wise in the last year. So in 2020, even though it was a huge election, it was COVID. And so we had to adapt to that. Traditionally, off-year elections are not as not as high turnout, and people don't really know, how important these local offices are and how much they impact their daily lives. But I honestly feel that that kind of has changed recently. And we've seen the numbers for recent primaries that have just been, like really unprecedented. So can you talk just a little bit about the importance of voting and what it means, to be involved, especially with your local elections on off years?
Right. And so, for example, in Cuyahoga County, we're one of the communities that has an off-year primary. And, it's, especially for women, and we struggled so greatly historically to get our right to vote and to keep it. Personally, I never miss an election. I haven't missed one since I was eligible to vote. And really, I think a lot of folks like to think that their representatives kind of have it all, well, they've got this, I don't need to pay attention. But, I think the reality is that things can be so changeable. And we saw this with COVID. We saw what happens when we're not prepared, when we're not ready. And so, I think that, we should always be making a plan to vote, include it in your own civic duty as a citizen of your community. You may not think it means much, but your vote is everything. It is a sacred right that you have in this country. And, I also believe that if we all can be more active in our communities will become even more welcoming and more reflective of what we want to see in them. So, I definitely urge anyone, if you're not registered to vote, which I don't know why you wouldn't be, please do that. And check out your local board of elections, know what's going on in your community and talk to people, raise your voice, put it out there and let your voice be heard. Everybody has the power to make a difference. And I think one of the greatest ways we can do that is by casting our vote.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you again so much for joining me, sharing your story and talking about the importance of inclusion and representation, especially in legislative politics. I am so excited to see how everything goes for you this year, and we will definitely be in touch very soon. So enjoy your evening, enjoy your James Brown and Pink in your playlist. I'll definitely have to check that out. And yeah, thank you again so much for taking this time with us.
Thank you very much, Michaela. It was a pleasure. Have a great
evening. You as well. All right. See you later.
Bye.
Bye.